And thirdly, I think the main concept of my book is that how Bitcoin is developing is becoming more and more similar to the gold standard in the sense that, and those of you who followed Bitcoin might be familiar with the story of Bitcoin scaling and Bitcoin growing. And there's a huge amount of drama about, Bitcoin can only process about 500,000 transactions a day. And that, unless Bitcoin's block sizes are doubled or increased, then it won't be able to grow. And if it doesn't grow, then it won't, if it doesn't have more transactions, then it won't be growing. But if you look over the last year, what has happened as the price of the transaction fees in Bitcoin has gone up, as the demand for Bitcoin transactions went up, yes, it did not kill Bitcoin. On the contrary, what emerged was second layer solutions, where now Bitcoin payments are being settled by Bitcoin payment providers or exchanges or gambling websites or any website that offers Bitcoin as a solution. What they have started to do is to batch all of their transactions with one another into fewer transactions, so that, in fact, today, a majority of transactions done in Bitcoin don't actually register on the blockchain. They're cleared on the blockchain. So, for instance, if you and I have an account in an exchange and I want to send you money from my exchange to yours, the exchange won't put the transaction usually on the blockchain so that I will have to pay the full transaction fee. They'll just move it on their own internal record from my Bitcoin account to yours. And then that's it. That's a transaction that has happened, but the Bitcoins are sitting there on their account under their name. And then at the end of every day or every week, they will batch all of their transactions with other exchanges so that each Bitcoin transaction now is probably standing for 2, 3, maybe 4, maybe even 10 off-chain transactions. And that's exactly what the system was like under the gold standard. Under the gold standard, the actual physical movement of gold happened very rarely. For every ounce of gold that physically moved from one bank or one country to the other, you had thousands of transactions taking place with that 1 ounce, with pieces of paper and bank accounts and so on moving it. So I think the misunderstanding of the scaling of Bitcoin is that it has to happen on-chain, and I think on-chain scaling is completely impractical. Where it's going to be practical is that second and third layer solutions are going to be developed, where Bitcoin is going to be used for settlement. And this is really, I think, in my opinion, where Bitcoin's strength lies. It's not going to replace your Visa or MasterCard payments. It will have the Visa and MasterCard's payment put on top of them. If you compare your Bitcoin payment, it needs at least 10 minutes. It needs about 10 minutes to get one confirmation. In order for you to be sure of it, you need a few confirmations. That's 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 minutes. That's, that's no comparison to your credit card. And it's also no comparison for your credit card because your credit card is not final settlement. You could still cancel it, and the guy could cancel it, and who knows what might happen. It takes weeks for the credit card payment to finally settle. But it shows up within seconds. So the comparison of Bitcoin payments is not to individual consumer payments. I think the valid comparison is between Bitcoin payments and interbank settlement payments, or between interbank gold settlement payments. And this, I think, is where Bitcoin's strength really lies. Because if you think of it, under the gold standard, the reason the gold standard eventually failed and the reason it eventually was overtaken by government money was the fact that gold clearance is highly centralized. At the end of the day, it's not cheap or easy or safe to move around big chunks of gold from one place to the other. However, if as the size of the economic transactions happening in gold continued to increase, more and more people started using second layer transactions. And that necessarily led to the centralization of all gold clearance into a few banks, and then eventually one bank in every country. And then that became very easy for government to take over, and then for government to move forward. So the difference then, and this is the key value addition of Bitcoin, is that it's like gold in that it's a final settlement clearance. It's like gold in that it is very hard money, but it's even harder. But what's even better about it than gold is that you can send it halfway around the world in under an hour for final settlement, for currently around $1 of transaction fees. Even if it goes up to $100,000 of a transaction fee to have a Bitcoin transaction on the Bitcoin network, that's still cheaper than sending large payments of gold halfway around the world, right? So when Germany tried to repatriate its gold from the Federal Reserve a few years ago, it cost a lot of money. So I think what this means is that What Bitcoin is going to offer us is not, you know, a new way of buying things cheaper. It's not going to reduce your credit card fees. It's going to offer us a new decentralized central banking system around the world, whereas instead of the current centralized system where we have one central bank for the entire world, I mean, we have several central banks, but let's face it, they all run on the dollar and they all run on the US monetary system. So instead of having one central bank responsible for pretty much all of the clearance of all payments around the world, we'd have thousands of central banks because they can all perform final clearance, because the Bitcoin network, even at current state, even without any improvements whatsoever, can undoubtedly do at least 500,000 transactions a day. So with 500,000 transactions a day, you could have thousands of banks around the world acting as central banks, providing final clearance, and running an entire monetary system independently of the banking system and allowing for payments everywhere around the world without having to rely on the government-run central banking system. It's a viable alternative to central banking, and this is a viable alternative that's only continuing to grow. And the main advantage that it has, which is the reason why people should take it seriously and stop dismissing it, is that it is harder money than anything that we've ever known, and certainly much harder than any of the monies that any of the central banks today are using.